Check out my shirt, introverted but willing to discuss books. I wanted to show you that because if you're watching the video and you saw the word introverted, you're gonna think we've watched too many of these videos and we know Bryan is not introverted. And you're right about that. But I have dear friends who bought it for me because I love to discuss books. So thank you to them. Anyway, thought for the week. At Lifeline, we do an annual growth plan. One of the questions on that annual growth plan is paraphrase something like this. What will you attempt for God this year to do for him that would only materialize, it would only happen, come to fruition, if God showed up in some amazing way? So we ask that question because what we want people to think about is how they're going to use their time, their talents, their treasures in a way that is maybe not safe, in a way that is risking something, in a way that is pouring their energies out when they don't know what they'll get back. So I want to take you to a text to talk about risk and just show a few things about risk. And it's Ecclesiastes chapter 11. And I'm going to begin in verse 1. And in the context of Ecclesiastes, by the way, is like a ancient philosophy. It's Solomon, and he personifies himself as Koheleth, the preacher. The preacher has words for people here in the ancient world. And he says this: cast your bread upon the waters, Ecclesiastes 11:1. For you'll find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8. For you know not what disaster may happen on the earth. Diversify your investment. So risk first is an investment. You gotta pour time and energy into it. He says, kind of diversify this investment, cast it on the water, see what comes back. So I think of that like you're throwing bread out onto the water, waves come in. What's it gonna bring with it? But you know, when I was growing up, I used to drop bread on in like a duck pond, and the ducks would eat it real quick. So you throw bread out, the chances are it might dissolve, it might be eaten up, it might be taken away, maybe down the beach. You may not get it back. So there's a risk, but it takes investment. And he says here, just be willing to sort of throw out a kind of investment where you don't know what's going to come back. So you can give yourself to things in your life, energies. You can give yourself time, your treasure, your talents to things. And you might get to the end of it and go, well, that was a waste. Well, maybe, but maybe not. But you've got to be willing to not always live within safe parameters. You got to be willing to step out when you don't know what really is going to happen. So the text goes on and says, if the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. What does that mean? It's just stating a natural fact. The fact is that stuff happens. Like the rain comes, trees fall. There's always things that can happen. That's why the next verse coupled with this is so important. So let me read verse 3 again. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves in the earth. If a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. Verse 4, he who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. Solomon is telling us something. If you get yourself caught up looking at the clouds in life, you'll never do anything. If you get yourself caught up gauging the wind, right? What happens? Well, you're never going to put seed in the ground, he says. If you're like a farmer who says, I can't go out and work today, too cloudy. Can't go out and work today, it's too windy. You're going to come up against it in life because there's always a reason not to do something. Like, people know this. Parents, there's always a reason for you to go. A young couple, there's always a reason for you to go, no, we're not going to have kids. We're married, but we're not going to have kids. Why? Because it's too expensive and it'll disrupt our lives. And it'll do all those things. It's always going to do all those things. There's always a reason to not go to school. There's always a reason to not take that class. There's always a reason to not have that conversation. There's always a reason to not try to heal this thing now. There's always a reason to not take that risk. If you look at the circumstances, you'll always have an excuse for not acting. But God made us. God wired us as a kind of people who are to seek in some way an adventure. We are in some ways to say, wait a minute, I'm willing to risk that conversation. I'm willing to risk these resources. I'm willing to risk this effort. I'm willing to risk this relationship. I'm willing to risk this time and energy and all that I pour in. Because if you don't risk it, in the words of Bruce Arians, former coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, no risk it, no biscuit. You don't get a reward. So all the great things that have happened throughout church history, whether it was Patrick, St. Patrick, but his work among the barbarians in Ireland, whether it's, Ramon Lull and him taking the gospel to North Africa, if it's Tyndale and his translation of the word in English, if it was Bunyan waiting and writing in prison, if it's Boniface chopping down the sacred oak of Thor, if it was John Eliot who gave away all his stuff to the American natives as a missionary who set up these praying tribes, if it was Adoniram Judson taking the word of God to Burma, if it was George Mueller praying and waiting for provision, if it was the theologian Karl Barth writing voluminously over against German liberals, if it was Jim Elliot, Nate Saint, Roger Youderian, Ed McCulley, Peter Fleming, the five that were killed in the 50s, taking the gospel to the Alcas, if it was Bonhoeffer with the Nazis. Those are big things. But guess what? It's also like the willingness to risk loving unlovable people. Some of you came to Christ because people were just dogged with you, and they risked their own emotional state to love you well. They risked sometimes their own well-being to reach you. They risked, safety, and extended themselves in ways to you. Sometimes it's not always magnanimous, sometimes it's smaller, but there's a risk that has to be taken. There's always an excuse for you to not act. What is it that you're afraid to do that this year you need to release yourself to do? What is it? Think about it. Pray about it. Process it. The text goes on in verse 5, as you do not know the way of the Spirit, as you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you don't know the work of God who makes everything. You don't know what God's going to do. You don't know how God's going to take something you do and use it in the lives of countless people. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Act, do, risk, be willing to just lay some things out there, and in diligence, set some things out before the Lord and see what he does. It's his job to bring fruit. It's his job to expand your borders. It's his job to bring the yield. But you've got to be willing to do something new. Maybe it's teaching a new class. Maybe it's taking a new class. Maybe it is having a conversation you don't want to have. Maybe it's starting a new career. Maybe it's engaging new people. Maybe it's going some new place. Maybe it is using your resources in a different way. I don't know what it is, but I just want to tell you, the Lord is one who's sovereign. I'm not and you're not. That means that for us, we live in a world where to take action And to take serious action is to take risk. And we're going to need to do that. We're going to need to do that as what it means for us to be a kingdom citizen. So I want to encourage you to step out in faith in something this year. Identify what it is that you're going to do, that the only way it will materialize and come to fruition is if God showed up miraculously. And let's see together what he does. I hope the Lord blesses you this week. Take care.